I'm sure you're all aware of the kind of big surge in interest in women's issue, women's rights over the last few years, at least in the Western world, in the US in particular. Just to give you an example, in the US, the number of conferences about women's rights tripled over the last couple of years. And the last Fortune 500 conference on the subject retailed at $8,500 to attend, and yet there was a 250 people waiting list. So, something that the Future Foundation at least ought to provide a view on. But of course, that was never going to be, from our point of view, a debate about sexism or just a boring quantitative analysis of what's happening around the world. Rather, what we're trying to do is to give a dispassionate and non-politicized view on a kind of attempt to answer a number of key questions. And because of that, we decided collectively that this sort of issue didn't have to be addressed by a woman, so I volunteered to look into the issue. I rapidly realized what I was getting myself into, but here I am now. For the first time, I'm presenting on this issue. So these are the key questions. Okay, so this is the first thing I wanted to look at, which is the level of online activity about the issue in the UK. This is looking at UK data, and actually the number of Google searches using the word gender, feminism, or sexism. And if you look at the middle of the screen, you can see an increase since 2011, which was very much a low moment because of the financial crisis. But actually, the number of searches, the Google searches, looking at the word gender, is not back to the level it was in 2004. Same thing with feminism. The only thing that has increased a little bit, but albeit from a very low base, is the number of searches using the word sexism. Now, we also wanted to look at the Twitter activity on the subject. And this is the growth, again in the UK, in a number of tweets. This is basically month on month, using anything to do relating to gender, so equality, gender inequality, sexism, and so on and so forth. So you can see it's been increasing. It's been increasing quite nicely since 2011. But now, if you overlay, to this, the total increase in the number of Twitter users in a country is on a different scale, because if it was on the same scale, we wouldn't even see the blue line. This is what you see. So basically, 100% of the growth in interest in gender issues on Twitter is due to the fact simply that there are more Twitter users. There's a spike, as you can see on the right of the chart, which is September 2014, which was attributed to a couple of things, which was Emma Watson's speech at the UN, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but also Beyoncé's VMA performance. So far, on the one hand, we've got the media, we've got books, we've got critics talking a lot about gender issues, but the kind of online activity by the public is rather unspectacular. So why is it happening now? Well, we've looked at whether there were any sort of particular phenomena happening over the last couple of years, any quick changes in the gender inequalities, and there's nothing of that. Rather, it's kind of more longer-term things. The first one is what we call the social lag, simply the fact that there are far more women in a position of power with the desire and the power to take things further. The second thing really much comes from the celebrity factor, so Jennifer Lawrence, Beyoncé, of course, and all these people who are also, anyway, women in a position of power. And the third one is simply the growth in global communication and the fact that ideas can cross-pollinate very, very quickly and very easily. So Now, we also wanted to look at of course, the nature of these conversations across the world. And really we find quite a lot of similarities. I mean, of course, gender issues are going to be about inequality, violence against women, equality at work, representation in advertising. But beyond that, we found some interesting regional differences. So in the Western world, the US, the UK, the rest of Europe, is very much about three things. It's about representation of women in advertising. It is reaction to particular campaigns, especially the He for She campaign. As you can see, there's a UK tweet here, which is gender equality not only liberates women, but also men from prescribed gender stereotypes, but also equality in a workplace. In other parts of the world, in India, for example, it's much more about violence. In other places, it's even about basic rights to be educated. So, I mean, so far I've kind of talked about sort of what's happening, but what is the nature of the debate? Well, it's a complicated one because for every single argument or idea, we find a plethora of counter-arguments and criticisms. But within that, there are three really strands of feminism, or call it feminism, or at least kind of opinions about gender issues that seem to be very dominant at the moment. And the first one is very much spearheaded by the COO of Google, Sheryl Sandberg, and her book Lean In. And the kind of one-sentence summary is this, is that it is within women's power to achieve equality at work. And by uniting, women will be able to take things further and have a more, sort of work environment, a more women's-friendly work environment. The second one very much comes from the pop world, which kind of argues, amongst other things, that sexualization of women is no longer a form of objectification. Actually, it liberates women. And the third one is very much the He for She campaign, which was launched by Emma Watson, which basically says that the only way to achieve equality is if men and women work together in achieving this reality. It's no longer about a gender battle. And actually, she refers to genders as a spectrum rather than two opposite forces. So on the face of it, these things are different. But what they have in common, I think, is really, really important, is simply the fact that they are non-adversarial in nature, non-revolutionary. It's not about, as I said, it's not about a battle against men. It's about achieving kind of equality in a peaceful way. But of course, as I said, for each of these arguments, we've seen a plethora of criticism. So for some, Sheryl Sandberg only addresses white middle-class, powerful women. Pop feminism is seen by a lot of people as demeaning, and for some people, Emma Watson, He for She, is simply wrong. And actually, I would like now for you to listen to an extract of Emma Watson's speech at the UN. Can we have the first video, please?
The more I've spoken about feminism, the more I have realized that fighting for women's rights has too often become synonymous with man-hating. If there is one thing I know for certain, it is that this has to stop. Today, we are launching a campaign called He for She. I am reaching out to you because we need your help. We want to end gender inequality. And to do this, we need everyone involved. This is the first campaign of its kind at the UN. We want to try and galvanize as many men and boys as possible to be advocates for change. How can we affect change in the world when only half of it is invited or feel welcome to participate in the conversation? Men, I would like to take this opportunity to extend your formal invitation. gender equality is your issue too. Because to date, I've seen my father's role as a parent being valued less by society, despite my needing his presence as a child as much as my mother's. I've seen young men suffering from mental illness, unable to ask for help, for fear it would make them less of a man, or less of a man.
Okay, so you get the gist. It's really worth noting that at the beginning of her speech, Emma Watson defines herself as a feminist, and yet she invites men into the debates, saying that basically men are as imprisoned as women in their gender stereotypes. And it's also important because this view is beginning to be represented in advertising, as we will see later when I show you the last video. Okay, so far I've talked about the dominant discourse or discourses, as seen by experts, celebrities, and so on and so forth. But what about people? What about consumers? What do they think? How engaged are they with the debate? Do they care? Because actually, so far, looking at online activity is rather unspectacular. So, that's what we did, of course. And this is looking at 3 countries, Germany, the UK, and India. And it's looking at a proportion of people who basically agree that there is good reason for people in their country to campaign for women's rights. And basically in the Western world, here Germany and the UK, the levels of agreement kind of vary between 40 to 60%, depending on the country. In the developing world, such as India, the proportions are much higher, it's about 70 to 80%. So that's one thing. The second thing is, of course, women on the right-hand side are more likely to agree with the statement, as one would expect. What we also found, maybe surprisingly, is that young people, so Gen Y, were not more likely to agree with the statement. In other words, they don't seem to be engaging with the issue more than all the groups. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we asked kind of an opposite question, which is the support for traditional gender roles. So we asked consumers whether they agreed with this, that in a home, the man should be primarily responsible for earning a good living for the family, and the woman should be primarily responsible for raising the children, taking care of the house. So a pretty traditional, pretty, I would say, conservative statement. And what we found is that there are huge differences within the Western world. You can see at the bottom you've got Sweden, very, very small levels of agreement. Compared with the other extreme in the Western world, which is the UK, where you find quite significant proportions of people agreeing with the statement. What was absolutely remarkable, and that we didn't expect, well, with hindsight, maybe we did expect it, was that we find traditional views of gender much more in Gen Y, so young people, than older groups. And it's something that intuitively people would have found surprising, especially amongst young men. And actually, in the US, only 25%, a quarter of young men, actually disagreed with that statement. Either they agree or neither agree nor disagree. And even in the UK, only 40% of young men actually disagree with the statement. So it's quite remarkable when you think about it. We're in 2015 now. And as a result, what we're seeing is that over the last 4 years, there's no real change in the levels of support for traditional gender roles. We've been tracking this statement over many, many years, and it's been declining over the years. And for the first time, if anything, it's gone up a bit. And it's gone up a bit mainly because of young people, maybe because of Gen Y. So it's a bit of a tricky one. What's going on? I mean, it's the first time we've ever recorded a younger generation of people being more in favor of traditional gender roles than older groups. So there's maybe lots of reasons for that, and that would deserve its own presentation on young people on Gen Y. But what it says, at least, is that it's a generation, and we've seen that with other research we've been doing, it's a generation that doesn't like rebelling, doesn't like rocking the boat. And at best, they're going to be more interested in individual empowerment than actions that are there to transform society. So that's one thing. So these are the attitudes which are maybe surprising for some. But what about the pulse? What about the strength? Do people really care? Do they feel passionate about gender issues? Since we've heard so much in the media and so on and so forth. So I'm going to show you some data here, which is don't worry about. I will explain in a minute. It's basically looking at the strength of the level of passion for gender issues in relation to other things in life. The other things in life being other statements, or the 50 other statements we asked in our survey, from price to privacy to lots of other things. So I'm not going to explain the calculations, it's quite technical, but basically the way to read it is the more to the right and the higher on the scale, the more passionate the population of a given country is about gender issues. So you can see the passionate countries are definitely Sweden, for both men and women. Men are in blue and women in sort of pink, to keep the tradition going of colors. And also we found a lot of passion in the US and India, but only for women. Everywhere else, especially in the UK, you can see it's very much to the left, and especially for men, which is also very low. The pulse, in a way, is quite weak. And what we found when we measure the pulse is that a statement like women of all ages should look good every day generates more passion than a debate or or campaigning for women's rights. So it's quite weak. And actually, I would argue that the whole page three thing that happened last week is a reflection of that, because, well, look at the Twitter activity last week on the right-hand side. There were about 70,000 tweets over the issue. And I would argue, is it a huge amount? First of all, it's probably not a huge amount, but look at how it died down. Basically, by Monday this week, that was it. No one tweeted about it. And, and it's a huge thing. They withdrew page 3, they put it back on again, and so on and so forth. And the reaction was, okay, it made a bit of noise, but that was it. What's also interesting is if you look at, these are kind of representative tweets. It wasn't straightforward, and it wasn't one-sided. And this one at the bottom is taps very much into the kind of soft feminism around that, the kind of non-adversarial nature of feminism. I don't consider myself any less of a feminist just because I am not anti-page 3. Just want to put that out there, which I think is quite interesting. Now, the question is, this resurgence in feminism, is it short-lived? Is it going to last? Well, the first thing I would say is that, as you've just seen, the pulse about it is quite weak, actually, in most countries. Less so in America, but over here is quite weak. It's not led by young people. It's definitely not led by Gen Y, who seem to be showing some kind of quite a lot of traditional opinions on the subject. So, on top of that, I would say there is really a harsh reality, which is this. Is anything happening? Yeah, which is this. Which is, no matter what you think, real change beyond changes in kind of social norms, real change is happening quite slowly. And if you look at the UK, on the top left here is the growth in a proportion of women being board directors of FTSE 100 companies. It's gone up. I mean, it's gone up quite significantly over the last 10 years. But based on the current rate, it will take another 70 years to achieve equality. And the other thing is that, in a way, gender equality is part of a much bigger debate about fairness and so on, which includes race, sexuality, and so on and so forth. And then, inevitably, everything changes slowly and the kind of focus moves from one thing to another. And what I'm trying to say here is basically this kind of interest in gender issues is very much a thing of the moment. It sells very well, it sells particularly well in America, but is it going to sell that much in 3 years' time? There are big doubts about that. Now, in the longer term, now there are factors that could be properly disruptive. And the first one is simply the digital technological revolution. In the US, this is the only data we could find, actually, unfortunately. Only 29% of STEM jobs, so STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, only 29% of these jobs are occupied by women. You look at Google, 70% of Google employees are men. And in its tech jobs, only 17% are women. So the digital revolution is very much a men's thing. Or you look at the startup, Silicon Valley. Actually, talking about Silicon Valley, at Silicon Valley last year, 80% of companies had at best one female director and usually none whatsoever. So that's one element. The second element, which is I think equally as important, which Georgina was talking about, is the phenomenon of Depop. The fact that we're going to have huge mechanization and robotization is going to basically take a lot of jobs away. So the impact it's going to have on women is, you could see the headlines, is quite contradictory. We're not sure exactly whether it's going to benefit or not, but clearly what is for sure is that's going to reignite the debate on gender issues, but in a longer term. Now, the question is, how can brands respond to this? It's quite a complex issue, really. Well, the first thing is I think it's quite important to separate brands that focus on women, so cosmetics or media brands, even newspaper supplements and so on, that really look at one particular gender from the rest of the brands, because the former is much easier for the former to, because women talking to women, men talking to men, much easier to address the issue. But beyond that, I think, based on what we've seen, it's clear that the trend is much more about advocacy and positive images of genders rather than a battle of sexes. And I'm going to show two very short videos here, and to be a bit different, I actually chose the representation of men in advertising. And one is very much a zeitgeist, is Dove for men. And the other one is from South Africa, and it's quite recent, but very much 90s in kind of spirit, and I want to kind of show you both. And how basically the kind of representation of stupid men, stupid dad, is beginning to fade away quite quickly. Can I have the next video, please?
Daddy. Dada.
One more. Come on, we're all adults here, boys. Yeah. You get Rob. Come on. Reach for your dream, bro. Reach for the stars.
There you go. We are very stupid as men, aren't we? Just a quick thing before I wrap up is, anyway, talking about, if you're not a kind of gendered brand, is it a dangerous game to play? Well, it might be because, as I said, lots of people have different opinions, and very often, whatever you do, you're likely to create some level of anger. If you take, Facebook and Google, I'm sure you're all aware that now they offer egg freezing to their employees for free. And the idea behind it is to, or at least how they portray it, is to liberate women, but for lots of people, it seems to be a way of controlling women. So just a word of caution before one gets into the gender issues. Is it something that is really going to work? Is it really going to help you? It can in some cases, but it can be a dangerous game to play. So So to wrap up, well, I would argue that it's very much a thing of the moment, and that this kind of what is regarded by many people as a fourth wave of feminism is very likely to fade away well before there is a fifth wave. But the dominant discourse, and it's not the only one, of course, but the dominant discourse now is very much about inclusiveness, is about individual empowerment, and I would say sort of positive images of people rather than a battle of sexes. It has to be shareable, especially for young people, as we will see in a minute. It's incredibly important, something that they can use as social currency. And yes, there's a growing sensitivity, and there's always, as I was saying, always a danger if you get into the kind of gender debate that you are going to alienate some people. But at the same time, it can be very short-lived. Look at page 3 of The Sun. So I would like to end this presentation with a video that has had more than 50 million hits or views on YouTube, and it's Run Like a Girl, done by Always. And it's quite interesting, you will see, because it's actually quite a bold message. It actually tells women that they're also responsible for promoting gender stereotypes. But it works very well, it's well made, it's very shareable. So let me show it to you. Can I have the last video, please?
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to just give you some actions to do. I just do the first thing that comes to mind. Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aww.
My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
So do you think you just insulted your sister?
No. I mean, yeah, insulted girls, but not my sister.
Is like a girl a good thing?
Actually, don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing. It sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like you're trying to humiliate someone.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like myself.
Would you like a chance to redo it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.